The mission of FSU Coach is to prepare and equip the next generation of coaches and sports professionals with best practices and current research to enable them to pursue excellence. We have 2 academic programs, the online graduate certificate, which is 4 classes, and also a 10-class master's in athletic coaching. Our graduate certificate and master's program can be started at any time, either the summer, fall, or spring.
The types of classes that we offer focus on the athlete as a whole person. We focus on the theory and practice, the research, the helping skills. I came to FSU Coach because I truly believed in the mission and the purpose of the program.
I think I have my dream job being a head coach at Florida State, but I know there's always more ways that I can help my athletes and better prepare as a coach. If you're interested in going into coaching or joining the FSU Coach program, I would just say don't even think about it and do it.
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of FSU Coach Live. My name's Tim Baghurst, and joining me today is Noah Kaminsky. Noah, thanks so much for joining me. Always appreciate it when people reach out and say, hey, I'd love to be able to contribute to your show. And who am I to say no to an offer like that? So if you wouldn't mind, just give us a little bit of background of your coaching experiences and career so far.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Tim. I began coaching track and field as a volunteer when I was between jobs and I was looking for something to do with my time. I had been a track and field athlete, soccer athlete, swimming athlete, and I had stuck with track and field in college. So it seemed like a good opportunity to go back to my alma mater and help out the program in ways that I hadn't when I was an athlete. That kind of blossomed and grew, and I really loved it. I did some coaching education along the way. And then in that first spring semester, when I came back to my alma mater to help them out, the athletic director asked me if I would coach soccer as an assistant for their varsity program, which also included their junior varsity program as well. So I took on the role of assistant coach to the soccer team the following fall with the head coach. And then the real story begins when, after that first season coaching soccer, both JV and varsity, the head coach said, okay, the team is yours. And after less than a year of being what I would call any kind of coach whatsoever, volunteer, assistant, whatever, I became head coach of a decent high school program in New York City. And since that time, that was 9 years ago, I grew the program significantly. We became a championship winning team. And I continued coaching track and field for a variety of schools, not just my alma mater, but a private school not far away on the Upper East Side. I hopped over to a university in the Bronx. Then I briefly had a volunteer stint at St. John's. And then from that point, I decided to continue coaching with my club pole vault gym out in New Jersey. And that's kind of where I stuck with things until right about now, when I decided to move overseas and join my partner here in Budapest. So that's kind of the missing, that's the pink elephant in the room. I am no longer coaching at all presently. And I'm trying to build a small business consulting with coaches to help them better their practice and training session design. But that's essentially my story.
Coaching in New York City, I suspect is a little bit different to what a lot of coaches experience coaching in rural areas or even small schools that may not have that urban feel. In your experience, is it different, or is this just kids are kids, sports are sports, and it really doesn't matter where you are?
Well, it is very different. I would say that kids are still always going to be kids, but the big difference between New York City and somewhere like a rural town or even the suburbs is just the limitation on space and facility use. So Tuesdays and Thursdays when I was coaching track and field, we would go to the Armory Center for Track and Field in Washington Heights in New York. Mm-hmm. And it's a magnificent facility well equipped to host indoor meets at the national level or even international level. But when it feels like 40 to 50 high schools all sharing the same 200-meter track, the same high jump pit, the same long jump, the same throwing ring, it's really kind of numbing to the athlete's experience to be able to feel like they've gotten something significant out of training because it's just so busy. And so that would be like what the indoor experience is like. Usually you're training with your high school outside of that facility on Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays. Meets are just as packed on the weekends. But I think the real difficulty I always found was with my soccer coaching, which required applications for permits and permitted space use on the larger field facilities, the shared field facilities in New York City, like Randall's Island, where there are a limited number of soccer fields and there are more than that number of fields in team number, all trying to get the same space, all applying for permits year after year. And so I remember from the early days when I was coaching soccer, before we had standard permits issued year after year, where we would show up just hoping that a field was open because either another team canceled on their permit use or just decided not to show up. And if we used a field and then the team arrived, we would get pushed off because it was their space and we would have to practice in the margins between fields. And we did that. We had practice after practice where we were playing in the margins and doing the best I could. And no matter what practice plan I came up with, I would have to pivot and just redesign what training looked like for my soccer players because we had no choice.
How did that work with parents and even the players, knowing that you're doing the best you can, but these other teams have the fields?
Yeah, it's a mixed bag. I would say that the parents who grew up in New York City were actually the most friendly and accommodating about it. I mean, I think they understood from their own time when facilities were even worse. But there were parents certainly who would call me up and say, like, why is it that we couldn't practice on Tuesday when normally we have the ability to practice? Or why is it my son says we went out to Central Park because the permits weren't available at Randall's Island and we got booted off the field by a middle school charter, a charter middle school, like those are things and conversations that I had to entertain a lot early on. I got wise to it, started applying for permits, and also you learn the system of New York City parks to know when to show up for a field versus when not to show up for a field. I also got better at programming our training to be centered around the school itself. So that we could go use a little bit of field space or the courtyard of the school and then go back into the weight room afterward. But it was, and I think it remains a very difficult part of coaching in New York City, whether soccer, baseball, any outdoor sport, lacrosse. It's not something that I think is going away either.
What about challenges with weather? I know New York City is not always the most mild of temperatures. You're playing
I think I'll speak to
hard.
I think I'll speak to our preseason for soccer first, simply because when it's summer, you can expect thunderstorms pretty regularly. And I would say out of my 9 preseasons that I've coached, probably every single one of them had a rainout day. Where practice was just canceled, or you're like right on the edge. It's like 1 o'clock and you're supposed to decide if practice is going to happen later that afternoon. And, you don't know what to do, but the safe thing is to say practice is canceled, and then it ends up that there is no thunderstorm. Like those are the days that drive you nuts. They infuriate you, but we've had some rainouts for sure. I think 1 rainout in a 2-week preseason is pretty reasonable. We've been lucky in the last couple of years to not have any rainouts, but that's certainly something you contend with. And as far as games go, the governing body in New York City, which is the PSAL, will basically make you play soccer if it's a turf field in the worst conditions. I mean, barring lightning and thunder, like there are limits. We've played at least a game every season in pouring rain because we were scheduled on a turf field, which is funny because on the other side of things, if there's a grass field with drizzle, they shut that field down.
You mentioned that you've done some private school coaching, some public school coaching, also some club coaching. What are some of the maybe differences in coaching those different groups or working in those administrations?
I think the difference that I felt between public and private high school was not that significant, especially in the city where, again, facilities are quite limited. So both schools that I coached at, both high schools that I've coached at in the city had very similar vibes in terms of weight room space, park access, use of public shared facilities like the armory I was talking about. That's track and field specific. I think the big difference between like high schools and universities is that the universities have the facilities and space, and there's a certain rigidity to university coaching that I didn't experience as much in high school. If a kid was absent in high school, you just moved on with the show. You just did what you could. And if the kid showed up late, you brought them into practice and you let them practice for the time they gave you. In college, it was unacceptable for there to be absences. And fortunately, as an assistant coach in both colleges that I coached for, the head coach took on the role of policing the absences. I didn't really have a role in that other than just to educate the student athlete about, what it means when they miss practice and how that plays out in their training overall. And then club is totally different. I mean, my club experience with coaching has been wonderful. Every kid that walks in that door is there because they want to be there pretty much. And they're soaking up everything that you have to offer, knowing that you're there to offer very specific and niche expertise on training. Like there's not a lot of pole vault gyms in the tri-state area. And to be one of just a few pole vault coaches can really make a difference for a high school or a college kid. So, and I'm not the head coach of the pole vault club that I worked for. The head coach has created an awesome atmosphere of learning and hard work. So, it's been very different, but all the facilities for the club were right there where we needed them.
I can't speak nationwide, but I know in Florida, there are challenges just to have enough players in some schools for the sports. And maybe fairly or unfairly, club sports are sometimes blamed for that, in the sense that a player might be required to sign a contract stating they won't play for the school. They'll only play for the club. I'm wondering if you've had any, dare I say, resistance or issues in a club environment and a high school environment where these players are somewhat torn between where they perform, where they compete.
Yeah, sadly, I would say that the times that that's happened to me and the times that I've encountered that has been because the athlete is either so good in the sport that you're coaching that they're receiving better training elsewhere, and they don't see the value in being a part of a high school team for the camaraderie and, I guess, the representation of your school. I could talk further about that with soccer. But the other thing might be that the athlete is in a different sport altogether, and they're just training with that high school team because they want to get in a little extra cross training for their main sport. So those two things are at odds. I always took the approach of like not to challenge the kids who are involved in soccer clubs outside of the high school team, simply because it creates friction that's unnecessary. And I would rather the athlete be open with me about what their scheduling is, so that I could help them and work with them to get the best out of them with the high school team, versus diminishing their experience with their club. Um, Occasionally, it's been a big issue, and usually I would say that it's because the kids' inability to communicate or to realize like how much I want to help them and support them with their scheduling. It's more than just sport related. It's really more about personal growth and development. But those kids lose out in the long run. To have a positive, meaningful experience with the high school team and then also your club team in the off season for the club, I think is a really important thing. And I think navigating that is just as important as playing the sport itself.
Now, traditionally in the US, coaching has been assumed that you coach in schools, you receive a stipend. And well, I can't speak to other states, but in Florida, that's particularly low. And it's an add-on, it's an extra that you do in relation to your other job, whether it be a teacher or working in the community in some way. I'm curious what your experiences are in New York City. Is coaching something that you can do as a career choice, or does it have to be a secondary option if you're not working in college or professional sports?
I don't think you can make a living off of coaching as a secondary career. Or I don't know how to phrase that. You can't make enough money off of coaching as a primary career in New York City unless you are coaching high school teams and then hustling during the day with private clients. Like I've met coaches who are full time and they have private one-on-one personal training sessions to fill their time until high school practices or club practices start in the afternoon when the school day is over. The money that you would make outside of your primary role, which in the case of coaching, usually is teachers. Like I'm a middle school science teacher, and I love that part of my life, but I also love coaching. I could never make enough money to get by in a place like New York City on just a coach's salary from coaching high school in the afternoon. And I don't really have an interest in personal training. I like the sports that I coach. I don't really have an interest in working one-on-one with clients in sort of a general fitness capacity. So no, I don't think it's very possible.
The stipend for Florida, from recent data that I got, averages at about $2,500 per sport as a high school coach. I'm guessing it has to be more in a place like New York City, but cost of living is also higher. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I think in the PSAL, the stipend for a sport ranges from a head coach stipend ranges from 7,500 to probably 9,000 with football. There's a couple sports that receive more hours than others for some reason, and those coaches would make a little bit more. But I think it does reflect the cost of living, no doubt. I mean, New York City certainly has some of the highest rent in the world.
But that's still low. That's still low considering that's football. We're not talking about, the track and field coach who makes probably much less than that.
Yeah. It is nice that I think in the public schools, they standardize it so that any coach of any sport, head coach, makes about the same.
That's good.
That's probably union related at one time in the past. Some teachers union probably fought for that and won it, but football and baseball, and I think maybe basketball coaches make a little bit more than the standard head coach salary. But I know what you mean. Like track and field is one of those sports that like really nobody cares too much about. It's a no-cut team. If you don't make the sport you want to get into, you go out for cross country or track and field. So the stipends in other places probably reflect that. I can't speak to other states, but certainly in New York City, it's equal across the board for all sports.
One of the things that I've been learning about over the past few years is how coaches are certified within schools in Florida. And fortunately recently wrote a paper and had it published on the just some of the challenges and maybe the lack of professionalism expected of coaches in Florida schools. Can you talk a little bit about what's required for you as a coach in New York City what are the standards? What are the expectations for professional development?
Well, I joke with my club coach that in order to coach track and field, you just need to be able to breathe. But there are more standards higher than that for all the sports in the public schools in New York City. Every coach has to be first aid certified, defibrillator CPR certified, and they have to do a concussion certification year after year. They recently changed the ruling so that if you are not already grandfathered in from coaching in the past, you have to have a teacher's certificate of some sort to be a coach. Check me on that though, because I'm not 100% on it, but I think you have to prove in some way or another that you have a relationship with the school beyond just coaching now.
So that person working at a bank can't come in and coach.
Yeah, I don't think so. So they have to have some kind of official recognition by the state education department to coach in the public schools. They also encourage coaches to do a coaching education course through whatever the governing body is of that sport, but there's no requirement for it as far as I know.
So there's no requirement. I mean, I understand the health and safety courses. I think those are nationwide in every state just because it's health and safety. But to me, it is, dare I say, shocking that coaches are allowed to work with young adults and children without any formal training on how to actually coach. Oh,
yeah. At the same
you're one body. You're a teacher.
Right.
You'll be fine.
I think at the same time, there's been a little bit of pushback from perhaps the volunteer side of coaching, because I've heard, I mean, that safe sport has become so significant that it's almost prohibitive to having volunteer coaches come on and help out a team. Because if a volunteer is told that they have to do a 4-hour course online, and don't quote me on the numbers, that they might just say, well, forget it. I was only going to help a half hour to an hour each week anyway, and dare I say that stands in the way of bringing more people in on the sort of volunteer or assistantship level. I do also find it surprising that the local governing bodies of sport and the administration of the leagues don't require coaches to get that kind of certification. It may vary by the sport itself, but the commissioner of our sport in New York City never made mention of us being required to do USA Soccer level 1 or 2. I guess they're A, B. Their letters.
It is interesting, and from my perspective, I can totally understand a volunteer saying, I don't want to do those 4 hours of training. The flip side, you look at that and go, well, your volunteerism means that you're just giving what you know, not what you don't know. And there's some things that you don't know that you probably need to know to work with, children and adolescents and young adults. I also think perhaps there needs to be some kind of maybe incentive to do that. Noah, you want to be a coach? Okay, you need to go do your A license or BCD. I don't remember which they start with.
I think it's F to A. I don't know.
Go to your F license, but we'll cover the cost of it. Versus, hey, you want to be a coach? Not only are we going to pay you poorly, we also going to require you to pay for your own training.
Yeah.
And I think there is sometimes some of that, no, I'm not going to do that kind of attitude.
The great irony for me is that when I first started coaching as a volunteer for my alma mater, my head coach, who I also was trained by as a student athlete, told me to go get my USATF level 1 coaching certification. And I did, and I didn't really enjoy the course because it was a lot of lecture, but what I learned from it taught me a lot and pushed me in a direction of continuous education and coaching. So I never stopped. I didn't stop after level 1. I pursued 2 more coaching education courses in USATF, and I became an avid reader of coaching education articles online, which is what got me started on writing about coaches education. The great irony, which I'll come back to, is all the things that I learned kind of pushed me to reject my head coach's methodology and approach to coaching, which is a whole other beast of my coaching journey that I could get into, don't really want to, but I think the positive takeaway is it made me a better coach, and it forced me to be reflective and start supporting other coaches with my writing.
Mm. Thinking now a little bit more generally in terms of coaches, towards the end of the show, I usually ask, what advice do you give to coaches, whether it be at different levels, other sports, it doesn't matter. What have you learned that you think others should be learning as well?
I always told my soccer players that the greatest thing I took away from my coaching career is really less related to the sport and more about how I facilitated the culture of a high quality sports team. And that was that you got to treat the youngest kids on the team like rock stars. They're the best kids. Nothing they can do is wrong. And you have to hold your older student athletes accountable because they've been through the system and they understand that you care at this point enough to push back on them when it's appropriate. So there's some of that. I also think that, and that also like increases the longevity of your student athletes. I mean, I think burnout is a real issue with sports at the high school level. And I think treating your youngest kids like they can do no wrong really helps them come into the sport and grow the team and the sport itself. So there's that. And then I also think that spending time playing games, like low stakes games in warm up, and creating healthy competition on the team between older and younger teammates of the same class year, things that just like are kind of frivolous and don't matter, like little sprint games, playing tag to warm up and laughing and joking with them, are great ways to foster a dynamic that every team needs to have. And the more you can build fun into the warm up, the actual workout itself, and in whatever ways you can take time to laugh at what's going on or appreciate it. And I just think that is so resonant with kids, and that in high school, kids need to have choice. They need to be able to enjoy their time. And the more you can do that, the more you kind of fill their bucket for the next day. And then I guess like the last thing I would say is for coaches is just like when you have a highly technical skill that you're trying to teach, it's okay to let kids get it wrong and just mess around and play with that skill. Like I think times where I've been maybe too overhanded, heavy-handed, I don't know what the expression is, on how something should be done the right way, I've actually turned the kid off to what they were doing, and made it harder for them to gain access into that skill or enjoy it as much as they could have. So I don't need to like stand over a kid as they're learning how to deadlift and cue the proper form. I can give them a kettlebell. I can watch them go a couple times up and down and say, hey, you know what? Feel it out. See how it goes. It's not that heavy. It's not going to hurt you. Play, just play and learn. And you've got teammates around you that are going to pick you up and lift you, who have been doing this longer or learning it just like you. And it's totally fine. And I think those things have made me a much, much better coach for high school and youth athletes in general. I think some of that applies at all levels, but I'm really a high school coach. That's where I do best.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people listen to this podcast or watch the show on YouTube at a later point and may have a question or two for you. What's the best way for them to reach out?
My email is coachkaminsky@gmail.com. You can reach me there. I'm pretty responsive. I also have a website, which is coachkaminsky.com. You can learn more about my coaching and how I support coaches, and you can find the links to my writing on the website as well.
And just for those listening to the podcast, that's Kaminsky, Coach Kaminsky, KAMINSKY @gmail.com. Well, Noah, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate you sharing a little bit of your contributions, and I hope everybody listening has enjoyed it too. Just a reminder, we try to do these once every couple of weeks during the semester. So be sure to subscribe, follow, like, wherever you're watching from or listening from. But on behalf of myself, Tim Baghurst, Noah Kaminsky, thanks so much for watching.